The Galactic Academy's cafeteria buzzed with the usual mixture of alien chatter, mechanical translations, and occasional food fight between species that considered violence a form of social bonding. Riley Santos sat alone at her corner table, methodically working through her calculus homework while ignoring the chaos around her. She was good at ignoring things. 23 years of being the only human in an academy full of aliens had taught her that survival meant keeping her head down and her mouth shut most of the time. Well, look what we have here. The voice made Riley's pencil freeze mid-equation. She didn't need to look up to know who was standing behind her. Zarak Voss, the Academy's resident nightmare, and her personal tormentor for the past 4 years. The 7-foot-tall Corvin had the charming personality of a rabid wolverine and the social skills of a space plague. Still playing with your little human math puzzles, Santos? Zarak's voice carried that special blend of condescension and malice that only bullies seem to master. Don't you have anything better to do with your pathetic existence? Riley kept her eyes on her homework. Just trying to graduate. Zarak, same as everyone else. Graduate. His laugh sounded like grinding metal. You really think they'll let some deathworld savage represent the Academy? You're nothing but a charity case, Santos. A living reminder of what happens when a galaxy takes pity on primitive species. The other students were starting to stare. Riley could feel their eyes on her, waiting to see if the human would finally snap. Some looked curious, others sympathetic, but most just seemed hungry for entertainment. Riley finished her equation and set down her pencil with deliberate care. Is there something you actually want, Zarak? Or are you just here to practice your vocabulary? Zarak's reptilian features twisted into what might have been a smile if it weren't so full of malice. He leaned down, bringing his scarred face closer to hers. I want you to remember your place. Human, you don't belong here. You never did. And where exactly is my place? Riley asked, finally looking up at him. Her brown eyes met his yellow ones without flinching. According to you, I mean, scrubbing floors, cleaning waste disposal units. Maybe if you're really lucky, they'll let you work in the kitchens. He straightened up, towering over her. Face it, Santos. You're not smart enough to compete with real species. You're just taking up space that could go to someone who actually matters. Riley's jaw clenched, but she kept her voice steady. Fascinating theory. Got any evidence to back it up, or are we just going with a gut feeling here? The cafeteria had gone quiet now. Even the Blorg students, who usually communicated through explosive chemical reactions, had stopped their dinner-time fireworks show to watch. Zarak's crest flared with anger. Evidence? How about your test scores? Dead last in advanced stellar engineering. Failing marks in xenobiology. And don't even get me started on your combat simulations. Actually, Riley said, pulling out her datapad, I'm rank 7 in stellar engineering, 3rd in xenobiology, and I passed every combat simulation this semester with honors. But hey, who's counting? A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Zarak's crest flattened against his skull. That's impossible. You're lying. Riley tapped her datapad, projecting her academic records for everyone to see. The holographic display showed grades that would make most honor students weep with envy. Oops, she said with mock innocence. Looks like someone's been getting their information from the wrong source. Maybe you should check your facts before running that mouth of yours. Zarak's yellow eyes narrowed to slits. Grades don't mean anything. Human. This academy isn't about memorizing data. It's about proving you're worthy to serve the galaxy. And when it comes to real tests, real challenges, you primitive deathworlders always fold. Real tests. Riley leaned back in her chair, a dangerous glint in her eyes. Like what kind of real tests? Physical prowess, mental fortitude under pressure, the ability to function when everything's falling apart around you. Zarak's voice was getting louder, attracting more attention. All the things your soft little species never had to develop. Riley almost laughed. Soft. He'd call humans soft. If only he knew what she'd survived just to get here. That's an interesting perspective, she said carefully. Tell me, Zarak, have you ever been in an actual combat situation? Not a simulation. Real combat, where people can actually die. Something flickered in Zarak's eyes. I don't need to justify myself to a human. That's a no, then. Riley stood up, and even though she was barely 5'6", something about her posture made Zarak take a step back. See, the thing about deathworlders is that we don't just study survival. We live it every single day. The temperature in the cafeteria seemed to drop a few degrees. Riley's voice had gone quiet, but somehow that made it more terrifying than if she'd been shouting. You want to talk about mental fortitude under pressure? Riley continued. Let me tell you about my commute to school when I was 12 years old. 3 miles through territory controlled by creatures that would use your bones as toothpicks, in weather that would freeze your blood solid in under 30 seconds. She took a step closer to Zarak, who was now looking decidedly uncomfortable. You want to talk about physical prowess? I've been sparring with apex predators since I could walk. Not training simulations. Real predators with real claws and real teeth who really wanted to eat me. Another step closer. Zarak was definitely backing up now. And mental fortitude? Try making life or death decisions when you're 8 years old, alone in the dark, with things hunting you that your species would classify as mythological horrors. The cafeteria was dead silent now. Even the background hum of the ventilation system seemed muted. But you're right about one thing, Riley said, her voice barely above a whisper. This academy is about proving you're worthy to serve the galaxy. So let's prove it. Zarak's crest was now flat against his skull, a sign of extreme nervousness in Corvan physiology. What are you suggesting? A challenge? Riley smiled, and several nearby aliens shivered. Since you're so confident in your superior capabilities, let's put them to the test. You and me, whatever competition you want. The winner gets to stay at the academy. Loser transfers out. The crowd erupted in excited chatter. Challenges between students weren't common, but they weren't forbidden either. It was considered a legitimate way to settle disputes that couldn't be resolved through normal channels. Zarak looked around at the watching faces, clearly realizing he'd backed himself into a corner. Fine, he snarled, but I choose the challenge. And I choose something that will expose you for the weak pretender you really are. Name it. Zarak's smile returned, uglier than before. Combat simulation. Full contact. No safety protocols. First one to yield or fall unconscious loses. Riley nodded slowly. Acceptable. When? Tonight. Training Bay 7. Oh, 100 hours. Zarak leaned down again, lowering his voice so only she could hear. I'm going to enjoy breaking every bone in your pathetic human body, Santos. And when you're lying on the floor bleeding, everyone will see what deathworlders really are. Weak, fragile, obsolete. Riley looked up at him, her expression utterly calm. Zarak, what? You just made the biggest mistake of your life. The words were spoken so quietly that only he could hear them, but something in Riley's tone made his blood run cold. For just a moment, looking into her brown eyes, he saw something that made his primitive reptilian brain scream warnings about apex predators and mortal danger. Then the moment passed, and Riley was just a small human girl again. She gathered up her homework, closed her books, and headed for the exit. See you tonight. Zarak, she called over her shoulder. Try not to embarrass yourself too badly. As she left the cafeteria, the excited chatter resumed behind her. Students were already making bets, discussing strategies, and speculating about the outcome. Most seemed to think Zarak would win easily. After all, he was bigger, stronger, and had years of combat training. What they didn't know was that Riley Santos had been training for this fight her entire life, not in simulators or training programs, but in the real world, in places where a single mistake meant death, and second chances were a luxury that evolution couldn't afford. Riley made her way to her dormitory room, a small space she'd managed to secure in the least desirable section of the student housing complex. As she activated the privacy locks and settled down at her desk, she allowed herself a small smile. Zarak thought he was fighting a scared little human girl. He had no idea he just challenged a survivor of New Terra's wilderness, someone who'd grown up in an environment so hostile that Galactic Survey had classified it as uninhabitable for most known species. She opened her personal files and began reviewing everything the Academy database had on Corvin's combat techniques, physiological weak points, and psychological profiles. If Zarak wanted to make this a learning experience, she was happy to be his teacher. By the time she finished her research, Riley had identified 17 different ways to incapacitate a Corvin warrior without causing permanent damage. She'd also found 3 methods that would cause permanent damage, just in case Zarak decided to escalate beyond what she was comfortable with. The last thing she did before leaving for the training bay was record a message for her parents back on New Terra, just in case things went wrong. She wanted them to know she died fighting rather than backing down from a bully. But as she sealed the message and headed for the door, Riley was smiling. Things weren't going to go wrong. Not for her, anyway. Zarak Voss was about to learn why humans were called deathworlders. And it wasn't because they were soft. Training Bay 7 was empty when Riley arrived, exactly 5 minutes before the scheduled time. The room was designed for a full-contact combat simulation, with adjustable gravity, atmospheric controls, and medical scanners built into every surface. It could simulate almost any environment in known space, from the crushing depths of Aquarius Prime to the hellish volcanic plains of Igneous. Riley suspected Zarak would choose something that favored his natural advantages. Higher gravity to slow her down, maybe a thin atmosphere to tax her cardiovascular system. Corvin evolved in heavy gravity, low oxygen environments, so it would make sense for him to try to level the playing field. The door hissed open behind her, and Zarak strode in like he owned the place. He'd changed into combat gear that highlighted his impressive physique and made him look even more intimidating. Several other students had followed him in, apparently hoping to witness his inevitable victory. "Ready to surrender, Santos?" he asked, cracking his knuckles with sounds like breaking wood. "I'll make it quick, if you just admit you don't belong here." Riley looked at him calmly. "I thought we were fighting, not having a therapy session. Are you ready to start, or do you need more time to work through your insecurity issues?" Zarak's crest flared again. Set environmental parameters. He growled to the room's computer. Corvin Homeworld Standard. 3 times standard gravity. 30% oxygen. The temperature is 50 degrees Celsius. The room shimmered as the environmental controls engaged. Riley felt the increased gravity settle on her shoulders like a heavy blanket, but she didn't let it show. She'd trained in conditions that would make Corvin's homeworld look like a vacation resort. "Ready?" The computer asked in its neutral voice. "Ready," Zarak said, dropping into a combat stance that showed off years of formal training. Riley simply nodded. "Begin." Zarak charged forward with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight. His massive claws extended, his reptilian features twisted with predatory focus, his powerful legs driving him forward with enough force to shatter concrete. Riley waited until the last possible second, then moved. What happened next would be talked about in hushed whispers throughout the Academy for years to come. In the span of 3 heartbeats, Zarak Voss went from confident predator to unconscious heap on the training room floor. And Riley Santos was just getting started. The silence in Training Bay 7 stretched on like a hell breath. Zarak Voss, all 7 feet and 300 pounds of him, lay sprawled across the floor in a position that suggested his unconscious mind was trying very hard to forget what had just happened to him. Riley stood over his motionless form, not even breathing hard despite the crushing gravity and thin atmosphere. She looked down at her fallen tormentor with an expression of mild disappointment. "Really?" she said to the unconscious Corvin. "That's it? For years of trash talk, and you go down in 3 seconds?" The students who'd come to watch Zarak's inevitable victory were staring at Riley like she'd just performed actual magic, which, from their perspective, she basically had. "How?" whispered Cafeteria, a delicate crystalline being whose species communicated primarily through harmonic resonance. Her entire body was vibrating with shock. How did she move like that? Riley glanced at the crowd of witnesses, noting their expressions of awe, terror, and something that might have been respect. "Physics," she said simply. "Leverage, momentum, and about 16 years of practice." She knelt next to Zarak and checked his pulse. Strong and steady. His breathing was regular, and the medical scanners weren't showing any signs of serious injury. "Good." She'd been careful to incapacitate rather than damage. This time, he'll be fine, she announced to the room. Probably wake up in about 10 minutes with nothing worse than a bruised ego and a mild headache. Though knowing Zarak, the ego injury might be permanent. The computer's neutral voice filled the silence. Combat simulation complete. Victor, Riley Santos. Time elapsed, 2.7 seconds. Medical intervention, not required. 2.7 seconds. Riley almost smiled at that. She was getting slow. Back home on New Terra, a fight that lasted almost 3 seconds was practically an epic battle. This is impossible, stammered Throg, a massive redemptor whose species prided themselves on their combat prowess. No being can move that fast. Not under these conditions. You're right, Riley said, standing and dusting off her hands. No being can move that fast. Good thing I'm not just any being. I'm a deathworlder. The word sent a visible ripple of unease through the assembled students. Deathworlder. They'd all heard the term, but most of them had never really thought about what it meant. They were about to get a comprehensive education. Riley walked over to the environmental controls and reset them to Academy standard. The crushing gravity lifted, the air thickened, and the temperature dropped to something resembling comfortable. Several aliens sagged with relief as the conditions became tolerable again. Does anyone else have questions about my qualifications? Riley asked pleasantly. Because I'm happy to provide additional demonstrations. The crowd began backing toward the exit with remarkable unanimity. Even Throg, who stood nearly 8 feet tall and could bench press a hovercar, was retreating like Riley had just announced she was contagious. Wait, called out Nixal, one of the few students who'd ever shown Riley genuine kindness. The bat-like Vesper looked confused rather than terrified. What actually happened? I was watching, but you moved so fast I couldn't follow it. Riley considered her answer carefully. These students would spread word of tonight's events throughout the academy within hours. What she said now would determine how the rest of her time here played out. Zarak made a classic mistake, she said finally. He assumed that bigger and stronger automatically means a better fighter. It's a common error among species that evolved in relatively safe environments. Safe environments? Throg grumbled. The Corvin homeworld has predators that could tear through battle armor. Define predator, Riley said, and something in her tone made everyone pay attention. Because where I come from, we don't really have predators in the traditional sense. We have competitors. She gestured to Zarak's unconscious form. Zarak's species evolved to hunt creatures that were smaller, weaker, and less intelligent than they. They developed size and strength because those traits gave them advantages over their prey. Riley began pacing, and her audience found themselves unconsciously tracking her movements like prey animals watching a stalking cat. Humans evolved differently, she continued. We didn't start at the top of the food chain. We clawed our way up from the bottom, competing with creatures that were bigger, stronger, faster, and better armed than we were. Do you know what that does to a species over millions of years? No one answered, but they were all listening. It makes them smart, creative, adaptable, and absolutely ruthlessly efficient. Riley's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. A Corvin warrior trains to overpower their opponents. A human trains to win, period. We don't care about fighting fair or honorable combat or any of that ceremonial nonsense. We care about walking away alive. Nick Sal's wing membranes fluttered nervously. But you didn't hurt him. You could have, but you didn't. Of course I could have hurt him. Riley's voice carried the casual certainty of someone discussing the weather. I could have broken his neck, collapsed his windpipe, or shattered every major joint in his body. But that would have been wasteful. Zarak isn't actually evil, just stupid and insecure. Dead doesn't cure stupid, and it definitely doesn't cure insecure. The implications of her words settled over the room like a cold fog. Riley hadn't just defeated Zarak. She'd done it while deliberately holding back, showing exactly the amount of force needed in the fight, without causing lasting damage. Besides, Riley added with dark amusement, what would be the point of killing him? Dead bullies don't suffer from humiliation. As if summoned by her words, Zarak began stirring. His yellow eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. He tried to sit up, failed on the first attempt, and had to settle for propping himself up on his elbows. "What happened?" he mumbled, his voice thick and uncertain. "Did I win?" The silence that greeted this question was so profound it had its own gravitational field. Riley looked down at him with an expression of exaggerated patience. "You lost, Zarak. Badly, embarrassingly, in front of witnesses. Would you like me to explain how, or are you going to figure out on your own?" Zarak's eyes focused on her face, and memory came flooding back. His crest flattened against his skull as the full scope of his humiliation became clear. "But that's impossible," he whispered. "I'm a Corvin warrior. I've trained since childhood. You're just a human." "Just a human," Riley repeated thoughtfully. "You know, Zarak, I've been hearing that phrase my entire life. From bullies like you, from teachers who thought I didn't belong here, from officials who wanted to deny my application. Just a human." She knelt down beside him, close enough that he could see the absolute certainty in her brown eyes. "Here's the thing about humans, Zarak. We're survivors. Not because we're the biggest or the strongest or the fastest. We survive because we never give up, we learn from everything, and we remember everyone who underestimated us." Riley stood and addressed the remaining audience. "Consider this an educational moment, courtesy of New Terra's finest export. The next time someone tells you about soft, weak deathworlders, remember tonight. Remember that size and strength don't mean anything if you don't know how to use them. And remember that humans didn't climb to the top of the food chain by playing fair." She gathered up her things and headed for the exit, pausing only to look back at Zarak one last time. "By the way," she said conversationally, "our deal still stands. You lost the challenge, which means you transfer out. I'd suggest finding a nice, quiet agricultural academy somewhere. Maybe take some courses in humility while you're at it." Zarak struggled to his feet, his pride warring with the undeniable reality of his defeat. "This isn't over, Santos. I won't be the last to challenge you." Riley paused at the doorway, and when she turned back, her smile was genuinely warm. It was somehow more terrifying than anything else she'd done all evening. "I'm counting on it," she said. "See, the thing about bullies is that they're pack animals. Once word gets around that the scary human girl isn't as helpless as everyone thought, all the other bullies are going to want to test themselves against me. It's going to be like Christmas morning every day." She waved cheerfully at the assembled students. "Feel free to spread the word, everyone. Riley Santos, room 317, available for educational demonstrations by appointment. First lesson's free, but after that, I start charging tuition." As she left the training bay, Riley could hear the excited chatter erupting behind her. By morning, every student in the academy would know what had happened. Some would be afraid of her, others would respect her, and a few would probably try to befriend her just in case they needed protection from someone else. But the bullies would come for her. They always did. It was like a law of nature. Show weakness, and predators circle. Show strength, and competitors line up to test themselves against you. Riley was looking forward to it. Back in her dormitory room, she sat down at her desk and composed a message to her parents. Not the emergency recording she'd made earlier, but a cheerful update about her evening's activities. "Dear Mom and Dad," she typed, "remember how you always told me that academy life would be different from growing up on New Terra? Turns out you were right. It's much easier. Tonight, I had my first official challenge from the local bully. It lasted less than 3 seconds, and I didn't even have to use any of the advanced techniques she taught me. I think I'm really going to like it here." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "Oh, and thanks for all those years of survival training that I complained about when I was younger. Turns out teaching a 12-year-old how to take down a razorback drake with nothing but leverage and timing has some unexpected applications in social situations. Who knew?" Riley sent a message and settled back in her chair, already planning her next day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new bullies, and new opportunities to remind her classmates why humans were called deathworlders. But tonight, for the first time in 4 years, Riley Santos went to sleep without worrying about what Zarak Voss might do to her tomorrow. Because tomorrow, Zarak Voss would be someone else's problem. 3 floors down, in the medical bay where he was being treated for a bruised ego and wounded pride. Zarak stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out exactly how his life had gone so wrong so quickly. All he'd wanted was to put the arrogant human in her place. Instead, he discovered that her place was apparently somewhere near the top of the Academy's unofficial food chain, and his place was significantly lower than he'd previously believed. The worst part wasn't the physical defeat. Zarak had lost fights before, though never quite so spectacularly. The worst part was a growing realization that Riley Santos had been holding back for 4 years. All those times she'd endured his taunts and insults without fighting back. She could have ended him any time she wanted. She'd chosen not to. Until tonight, when he'd forced her hand. As Zarak drifted off to sleep under the influence of mild sedatives, his last coherent thought was a promise to himself. Tomorrow, he would transfer to the quietest, most peaceful academy he could find, somewhere far away from deathworlders and their terrifying ideas about what constituted a fair fight. Behind him, the medical computer dutifully recorded his vital signs and noted that his stress levels remained elevated even in sleep. It flagged this as potentially concerning and scheduled a follow-up appointment with the Academy's psychological counseling service. The computer didn't know that Zarak's stress wasn't medical in nature. It was existential. Tonight, he'd learned that everything he thought he knew about strength, power, and his place in the universe was wrong. And somewhere in the Academy's dormitory complex, Riley Santos was sleeping peacefully, dreaming of home and looking forward to tomorrow's lessons.